Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our second session for the Empowering Adirondack Nonprofit Boards for Success. Today's session will be led by Andy Robinson, focusing on financial oversight and fiscal accountability. Just again, a quick word of thanks to the hosts coming together to make this series possible. Of course, Andy. We have Cloud Splitter Foundation, United Way of the Adirondack region, and I'm Jen Russell joining from Adirondack Foundation. Some housekeeping notes as we're getting started. We are curating the resources and sharing them each week. So you will have received an email on, I believe I sent it out on end of day Tuesday with the documents for this week's session, as well as the recording for last week. All of it, we are also organizing the resources together in Google, in addition to sharing it by email each week. So if you missed that or can't find that message, I'm going to put a link to just our resource folder here in the drive. And we'll reference that throughout the session. If you're having trouble with Google Access, do check your email because all of those files were sent to you that way as well. So with that housekeeping note, I will pass it over to Andy Robinson to get us started.
Jen, thank you for hosting. Thanks again to our sponsors for putting this together. I will also do a shout out. The foundation is proactive, smart, creative, compassionate. I have worked with the foundation for many, many, many years, and I'm always grateful to have your partnership. Cloud Splitter has been an amazing support and resource for the people of the community for a long time. Shout out to everybody there, and a lot of appreciation for John and Brian at the United Way and all of their colleagues, because they've been an essential partner in this process. So thank you all for coming together to create this, and thank you all for showing up. Last week we topped out at 150 people, which is sort of remarkable. We may get there today, we'll see. But as I like to say, whoever comes is the people who need to be there. And so thank you for investing an hour of your time in your own professional development and your organization's professional development. Today's topic is all about financial management, financial oversight, fiduciary responsibility, all of those big words, but it's simpler than you think. I will be talking with you about how to ask better financial questions. We'll talk a little bit about the jargon. The jargon can be off-putting and a little scary, and I'll try and demystify it a little bit. I think the tool that most of us need is a financial dashboard, something that tracks some basic metrics that we can pay attention to as board members, as non-financial staff, as community members. We'll talk a little bit about risk management. That is one piece of this. And I hope we have a good time. I want you to walk out of this feeling a little more confident than you felt walking in. So let's start with a really basic question. What's your relationship with math? How do you feel about mathematics? How do you feel about numbers? And this is a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is, oh my God, this is frightening. This is scary. Number 5 is, I'm all about the math. I love the math. So you can be a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5. Where would you put yourself on the math scale? Jen, where are you?
Ooh, I like at the 4.
Okay, that's cool. They're all good numbers. Shout outs to the 1s and 2s, because I appreciate your honesty and there's no shame in that. All right, so here's what we've got. We got 6% 1, we got 2% 9, we have 34% right in the middle, and 28% are 4s and 24% are 5s, which means they're all about the math, and you should all be leading this webinar, and I should be taking off, but so be it. So here's the, I think we've shared the results already. I'll make sure you can see them. There you go, and we'll close the poll. So here's the switcheroo. Financial management isn't really about math. I mean, having some math facility is a beautiful thing. That's not actually the work. The The work is what sort of questions are you asking? And are you getting good answers to those questions? So I want you to imagine that I run into you in the grocery store and we're standing by the avocados or we're, shopping for breakfast cereal. And I say, like, are you on that board? And you go, yeah, I am. I said, well, how's it going? You talk a little bit. And then I start asking financial questions about the organization you are serving. And my theory here is the following questions you should be able to answer without looking at spreadsheets, without cracking open your board notebook, without pulling out your iPad. This is stuff that should be top of mind for you if you are a board member or staff leadership within your organization. So the question is, could you answer these questions or would you turn and run? Would I be chasing you down the produce aisle saying, wait a minute, I have another question? So FYI, we have also sent this to you in the form of a one-page quiz. And we sent it out earlier. We'll put it in chat. There's a link to a Google Doc there with all these different documents. So I'm going to have you do the quiz while we're talking. You don't need the quiz sheet in front of you because it's all on the slides. But my proposal is that if you find this useful, you bring this back to your own board as a quiz for them to do. And this will be frightening for some people, but maybe that's okay. Question number 1. What's your annual budget? Like, what does it cost to run your organization? And do you have the mix of revenue that's sustainable, predictable, flexible? Like, what does that look like? And I bring this up because if you're a board member and you're serving an organization that has one staff and a $100,000 budget, I mean, that's one thing. On the other hand, if you're serving on the board of a $5 million organization with multiple employees and a lot of different lines of business, that is a different thing. And the financial skills you need in each of those circumstances are somewhat different. So the how much does it cost to run your organization question and where does the money come from is a really key question for board members to understand. Now, one way to think about this, and Jen, we'll have to send this out afterward because this is another handout that I don't think I included, but we'll make sure everybody gets. This is what we call your income diversification. And it's pretty simple. Down the left side, we have some different sources of revenue. Foundations, corporate and business, government, membership dues and donations, major gifts and board giving, benefit events, earned income, investment and interest, other. Now, you can change these categories. These are not written in stone. You can play with the categories. Your categories would vary. But you'll notice after each one of those categories is a dollar amount and a percentage. And the way the form works is you fill it out and you have it for last year, the current year, and then some year in the future. And the conversation you need to have as a board member and as board members together is what is the optimal mix of income for our kind of organization? And how do we get from here to there? What is our income mix now? And what are we aiming at? And if you learn nothing else from today, that's the key thing is you really need to know where the revenue comes from and how to strengthen that revenue mix. And I will say in a subsequent session, I think it's next week or the week after, we are talking about boards and fundraising and how board members can actually help generate more revenue for your organization. So that is the revenue side. Here's the expense side. What are your largest expenses? What percentage of the budget do they consume? And I'll give you a note here. If you have employees, many of you do, payroll is going to be your biggest line item. But, is it 60%? Is it 70%? Is it 80%? How does that compare to peers? And are you comfortable with that? So you need to know something as a board member about the expense side as well. I really don't, one of my jobs today is to keep you out of the weeds of specific line items, which is tactics, and I want to keep you at the level of strategy. And this is a strategy question. Third one, do you have a reserve fund? How do you use it? How can you access it? How much is in it? And one of the ways we think about this is months cash on hand. Right? How much money do you have if you had to shut down the organization and you were spending down the reserve? How long would it take before that money was gone? And the usual standard in the nonprofit world is we probably want to have 3 to 6 months of reserve cash on hand. This is not an endowment per se. This is flexible money. And there are certainly organizations I know that have a year's worth of money stashed in the bank. To which I say, A, good for you, and B, stop hoarding money. Because you have a mission to do, right? People give you money to actually go out and use it in the community by doing programming, right? So if you're sitting on a whole lot of money, then I have a conversation with you about that. On the other hand, if you are always scrambling to make payroll and you're never more than a month ahead, that's a bit of a problem. And trustees, board members need to be conscious of that and need to be thinking about how do we rectify that. Now, when you look at your different programs and activities, which ones are cost centers, meaning they cost more than they bring in? And for many nonprofits, that's a lot of what we do, and that's okay. And which ones are profit centers? Is there any programming that you do that actually generates more money than it costs to deliver? Which would be amazing. That is possible. It is difficult, but it is possible. So one of the ways I would encourage you to think about this, here's a lovely book from Gene Bell, Jan Masaoka, Steve Zimmerman. These are three of the great gurus in the nonprofit world. They wrote this book some years ago called Nonprofit Sustainability. And they introduced a tool that I really like called the matrix map. And so there are 4 quadrants here. The line going up and down is what's the impact of the programming on your mission. So at the top, something that has high mission impact, it really moves the mission. At the bottom, low mission impact. Right to left is fundability or profitability, meaning it brings in money or it doesn't bring in money. So here's how you think about this tool. Upper left, you see where the heart is? This is stuff that has a high mission impact, but is hard to fund or doesn't pay for itself, and you're always trying to, and there's a lot of work in the nonprofit world that fits into that upper left quadrant. Upper right quadrant, the star, this is stuff that moves your mission in a good way, but is also fundable, profitable, relatively easy to raise money for. And if you have lots of programming in that upper right quadrant, you are doing really well because that's a gift. Excuse me, the upper right. Lower right is where we have the money tree. Okay, this is stuff that doesn't really move your mission, but might generate revenue for you. And there are certainly some fundraising activities that fit here. If you actually are one of those people that does a golf tournament, but golf has nothing to do with your mission, I'm not criticizing, I'm just observing, then that might land down there. And so sometimes we find activities that generate revenue because we need the revenue, but they really don't move the mission very far. And then the lower left with the stop sign is obviously the things that you shouldn't be doing because they cost a lot of money and they don't really advance your mission. And shockingly, there's more of that going on in nonprofit world than we want to admit. These might be legacy programs where you're still doing them, but the world has changed and they're not as relevant as they used to be, and they're hard to fund. This may be partnerships you got into with other organizations because you like the people and you like the organization, but the match isn't very good and it doesn't really advance your mission very much. So this is a sort of litmus test. And the way I would use this and have used it is I would put this out on the floor and we'd write down what each program or project area is. And then we start placing them on this chart, like where are they? And it's a really interesting group exercise because people will argue like, well, that's actually moves our mission a lot. And other people are like, no, it really doesn't. So where does it fit on this? So you've got the reference. If you want to look up the book, or you can even Google matrix map and you'll see what pops up because there's a lot of good stuff. And this is a helpful analysis tool for board members who are trying to do their fiduciary oversight. Now, this is an interesting question. Um, Once upon a time, a colleague of mine, an executive director, went to some version of this workshop and she said, huh, I wonder if my board is a profit center or a cost center. So what she did was she calculated the cost of having a board. In parentheses, this is legally required, right? But there are actual costs. So that included her time as the executive director to manage the board. This include other staff's time managing and interacting with the board, cost of board meetings, cost of board events, um, travel, all of that. So there was a cost line. Then she added up the amount of money that the board members had generated via fundraising, what resources they had brought into the organization. And lo and behold, her board was a cost center, not a profit center. The board was costing more money than they were bringing in. To her credit, she had the courage to go to her board, show them the numbers and say, yo, you're a cost center, not a profit center. What are we going to do about this? So this is gutsy, but I think it's a really interesting exercise. Now, again, legally, our whole conversation over 6 weeks of the reasons why you have to have a board and how do we make it a good thing. This is one filter to ask that question. Question number 5. What's your organization's biggest financial risk? Financially speaking, what keeps you up at night? And it's worth noting that the financial risk may not be financial per se. For example, if you have a longtime executive director who's been there for 20 years and knows all the donors and knows all the funders and is the face of the organization, and that person leaves unexpectedly, they end up in the hospital or they have to leave town or whatever, they, God forbid, they pass away, that's a financial risk. A lot of us in the North Country are thinking about flooding in a different way as we have had several seasons of floods. And, that's a kind of financial risk because there's real costs to that. So in a minute here, we're going to send you off to breakouts to chat with other colleagues about this. And the rule for this one is we have to have the cone of silence, right? We have to have confidentiality because we're actually asking people to speak freely and honestly about their financial concerns relating their group. And what you'll find is a lot of you have the same financial concerns. I don't know that there's too many uniques that fit into this one, but I do want to give you a chance to talk about this. And when we come back, we'll ask people to debrief and chat and or raise your hand. We'll call on you as we did last week, and you can share with us what some of those financial risks might be. So I think the instructions are pretty clear. Jen, would you open the breakout rooms for folks? And we'll give you about 5 minutes on this round of breakouts. So if you want to answer, thank you for booting up the recording again. If you want to add something in chat in terms of what you heard in your group, if there are any themes, that would be great. Or you can raise your hand. You raise your Zoom hand and we'll call in and we can take a minute and get some feedback verbally. So if there are any common risks or themes from the conversation, I think that's what I'm looking.
So Andy,
and of course, there's always the plans.
This is definitely Martens. I think that we were joking about this question really comes up in a different context from probably prior seminars that you've done because of the financial situation involving federal government grants at this point.
Yeah.
So I think that probably that's the biggest problem right now for many organizations that rely on federal funding for operations.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I would say it's even sort of deeper than that because some of that federal money goes to the state who then regrants it. And you may be getting state money that's not actually state money. It's federal pass-through money. You're going to be affected the same way on that. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a big job, but I recently lost a job because a client said, we were going to pay you out of our endowment and our reserves, and that's down because the stock market is down. Mm-hmm. So we have to cancel the job because we have less cash coming off of that revenue source right now. So it shows up in multiple ways. So that's good, Kathleen. Anyone else want to offer a different financial risk? And again, you can put it in chat. Who's ever monitoring chat, you can feed those to me.
Our group in room 11 talked about the importance of grants and then public interest and support of our organization under the dire situation of our local immigrants being potentially deported.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is sort of cliche, and I apologize for saying the cliche out loud, but one of our jobs is to figure out how do we turn these risks into an opportunity. So for Diane's organization, this is now front of mind for a lot of people. And there may be a fundraising moment now that you didn't have 6 months ago because of that. We all learned a lot about pivoting during COVID. And this is another one of those pivot moments where I think board members have to be asking, what's the next iteration of our organization given these challenges? All right, so I'm going to move on. I'm going to proceed with the quiz here. Question number 6, how do you use financial management tools to measure your impact? Do you compute the cost per unit of service? So that might be each client you serve, audience member you entertain, acre you protect, child you house, English language learner you educate, whatever your mission is, right? And not everyone needs to do this, but it's something that funders are curious about. And I think if you're trying to provide financial oversight, and we're going to get into these dashboards in a minute, is one thing you can think about is what does it cost for us to do a unit of service, and how are those costs changing? Question number 7 is sort of an easy one, which is, based on your ability to answer questions 1 through 6, what do you need to learn to better understand this stuff? What do you need to get better at this? So if you were keeping score, if you got like most of these right, you're probably the treasurer. And, I love you. If you're even getting half of these questions right, you are finance committee material. And if you didn't get any of them right, you really swung and missed, it's okay. Believe me, you are not alone, because a lot of board members struggle with this. So at the risk of being pedantic here, you need to know this stuff. If you're on a board, and many of you today are board members, not all of you, but if you're on a board, you are a fiduciary. That is what the law says. That means you are responsible for the financial health and the financial integrity of your organization. And what we see consistently, especially in smaller groups, is the treasurer gives a report and people go, okay, good, sounds good. Or they'll just assume that somebody smarter than them, I'm putting that in quotes here, is paying attention to this so they don't have to. So I don't want you to be obsessive. I don't want you to lose sleep over this. I do want you to pay attention, and I want you to ask good questions. So let's start with some of the myths here. Myth number 1 is the real work is the programming, it's the activity, it's the advocacy, it's the arts, whatever we do, and all this attention to finances is something else. It's not the real work. And the reality is financial management is a way to measure your impact. And as it says here, if you can't measure your impact, how do you know if your work is working? Myth number 2, only the people who understand this stuff need to pay attention to this stuff. And, being redundant here, you don't need to know everything. You don't need to be the problem solver. You do need to know enough to ask good questions, engage with this, educate yourself, pay attention. Third myth, I don't understand the language, therefore I can't understand the concepts. And you know what, if you have a household budget, you understand most of the concepts. Back in the day when I was a kid, many, many years ago, my grandmother would consistently send me $20 for my birthday. It was a very reliable source of income, right? That's what we call a receivable. You know about that, right? You get your credit card bill and it's due by a certain date. That's a payable. And, I'm going to walk you through some of the language in a minute here, But if you manage money at all in your daily life, and pretty much everybody on this call does, you have a greater grasp of how this works than you realize. So we're going to talk about financial health. How do you know if your group is financially healthy? And there are 4, 5, 6 questions here to help you measure this. By the way, we will send you the slide deck. We will send you the recording. I appreciate that this is all a fair amount to absorb, but we'll make it as easy as we can for you to absorb it. Scale, first question, how big are you? And as I mentioned earlier, it's a different world if you are on the board of an all-volunteer organization that raises and spends $10,000 a year, or if you're on the board of a multi-million-dollar a year organization that raises and spends a lot. Liquidity. Do you have money in the bank? Can you pay the bills? So you need working capital. You need some money because the money goes in, the money goes out, and you need to have some that you can work with. Good amount of working capital is about 3 to 6 months available, unrestricted in the bank. That would be optimal. Next concept is solvency. Are you worth anything? Like if you close the business tomorrow, do you owe more than you have? Could you pay all the bills? And this is why we have balance sheets, because balance sheets will tell you about solvency. They show you what you own and what you owe. So are we solvent? Next question is profitability. Now, I realize you're nonprofit organization, so this is sort of an awkward word, but are you actually generating more money than you're spending? The bottom line is if you bring in less than you spend every year, you will not last long. So you have to think about money in, money out, and are we actually bringing in more money in than we are sending out? And then this is not really a financial question, but it is a financial question. What's your impact? Are you meeting your mission? How do you know? What sort of metrics are you using to measure the results that you aspire to get? So again, what I hope you're noticing this afternoon is this is not an accounting seminar, right? This is at a much higher altitude, which is how do we know if our organization is sustainable and functional? And how do we know if we have the resources to do our work? And how do we track that? So where I'm sending you is the idea of a financial dashboard. And these take a lot of different flavors, and I'm going to show you flavors of this. But this is the idea that you have a 1-pager or maybe a 2-pager, that you have certain metrics and you use those to track your impact. And so this is not instead of all the financial statements, but this is a distillation of that in a way that makes it easier for you to do oversight. Now, I'm going to show you an unreadable screen here. This was sent to you, and then I have a version of it that's more readable. So what we have here is borrowed from a book I did with my friend Nancy Wasserman. We sent this handout around where we've also put it in chat. And I'm going to show you a version of it that's a little easier to read, but this is basically a 1-page summary of some things that you could be paying attention to. I may go back and forth a little here. So here's a simplified version. The first column is indicator. The second column is how do we measure it. The third column is what it tells you. And then we have 4 sets of numbers. 2 years ago, final number, last year, final number, current year target, and then year to date. And year to date, in this case, we created this based on an August number, so it's 2/3 of the year. So one financial metric would be months cash on hand. How much money do we have in the bank? You measure it, it's the cash on hand divided by what it costs each month to run the organization. How many months, right? So what it tells us is liquidity, and we're aiming for at least 3 months. 2 years ago, we were at 2.53. Last year, 2.39. This year, 2.3. So far this year, we're at 1.5. So we're way down. So we never actually hit our goal. Our goal was to the number 3, and we've never been there. But at the moment, we're even worse than usual. So if I'm a board member, I'm looking at this and I'm like, where is all the cash going? Why do we have so little money in the bank? What do we do about that? Efficiency, cost per unit, cost per client served. How measured? Total expenses divided by the total number of clients. So if it costs $1,000 per client, then you'd have an answer to that. And this is a question about efficiency. So you'll notice it's gone from $12.99 per client up and down. We're now at $11.27. So it's costing a little less money per person we are serving now. Again, if I'm a board member, I'm curious about this. What does this mean? Are we gaining more clients without adding staff? Are we finding efficiencies? Are we losing both clients and staff? What's going on here? And then we have impact, which is, what I created here. I'll go back a step. We created this for an organization, a made-up organization called Neighbors Helping Neighbors, whose mission is to help senior citizens continue to live at home independently, to advocate for that, and also provide services to support them in doing that. That's the mission of this organization. So their mission is literally to help people continue living at home as they age. So how do we measure this? Annual tracking, what it tells you, are we succeeding at our goal? And they've gone from 197 clients still living at home up to 255, down to 210, down to 205. Again, if I'm a board member, I'd like to know what's going on here. The trend is up and then it's down. Are we losing people because people are passing away? Are we losing people because they've gone to other providers? Are we losing people because they moved out of state to live with the grandkids? Why is there a decline, and is that something we should be worried about? So in my ideal world, you can get a lot of this on one page. And again, we sent this out as a handout as something you can study and look at your convenience. But there's a number of metrics there. There are financial metrics, efficiency metrics, and impact metrics. So I'm going to pause here because this is a lot. And there may be questions about these. So let me see if there are any questions. You can either put them in chat, and my chat trackers will help me here. Or if you want to verbalize them, you can unmute, raise your hand, and share a question if you have. Quiet out there.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm, did you say these slides, these metric slides were already sent out? Was it by email?
Well, yes. What we've sent out, not the slide deck, what we did send out is this document as, I think, a PDF.
Cool. And was that by email? I haven't checked my email yet.
Yes, and I've
Jen,
been
they went out
sending it.
Tuesday?
I've been putting it in the chat too. I'll put it in the chat again. So if anybody wants to hop right there.
Thank you.
Yep.
You're welcome. Nathan, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. I wonder your perspective on choosing the right or how to choose the few things that are really important to measure. I think
good.
But you've already chosen it. So I'm wondering if you could speak to
Great.
how we choose the 3 line items for the dashboard.
Well, hopefully it's more than 3, but I like your question. Are we talking about the school, Nathan, or give me a for instance?
Sure. Yeah. I'm
Okay.
on the board of Lakeside Schools, a small, our budget's $500,000. So yeah, it's for Lakeside School.
Okay. Well, I'll riff on this for a minute. If I were the school, here are the things that I would want to track in a dashboard. Number 1 is enrollment, right? How many kids do we have? How many families do we have? The second thing I would want to track is how many of them are full pay versus how many are getting scholarship, and what's the average scholarship rate, and how is that tracking year to year? And, this becomes a mission question, like, are we needing more full pay students because that's how we balance the budget? Or are we trying to be more accessible for more kids, which means we're putting out more scholarships and we have to subsidize it a different way, right? So that's a way to think about that. And that would absolutely be a track in my dashboard. I'll just make up a few more. I would certainly want to know cash on hand. right? I'd want to know how many months operating money you had at any given moment. That's crucial. I would want to know, I would want to have something about expenses in there, and I'm not sure what it is. I would probably want to track expenses year to year. Like how much did we spend last year by March compared to this year by March? So is our expenditures up or down, and what does that tell us? I mean, I'm going to kick it back to you, Nathan. Unmute and give me one that you're thinking of now, and then we'll take another question.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That was great. I think of tracking fundraising, like where are we at in our active, what's our goal and where are we as far as fundraising?
Great. Yeah, that's useful. So I mean that's enough to get you guys started. Any other questions about any of these dashboards? I'm going to show you I'm going to show you another flavor of this in a minute, but if you want to ask a question, this is a good moment. Okay, I'm going to move on. There'll be more question time. So another way to handle this. Oh, go ahead. Give me your question.
I have a question. This is Barb Rotier, Protect the Adirondacks, and I think there's a lot of background noise where I am, so I apologize. I'll ask my question and then I'll mute me again.
We can hear you, Barb.
Okay. And my question is, it's our goals tend to be somewhat political, and I'm not even sure how you phrase. We might litigate something. Okay, you could say, well, did we win or lose this particular, litigation action? But there's an awful lot of stuff that it's much harder to pin down. So I wonder how you would comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. So I would think a couple of things. And I'm going back to the slide is up here. I think about this in terms of 3 buckets. There's a financial measurement, there's an efficiency measurement, and then there's an impact measurement. And where you went is impact, and I get that. So a couple of ways to think about impact if you are Protect or another advocacy organization that's working in the area is one would be size of your membership. Because the theory here is if you have a bigger membership, you have more power and you have more leverage. It's indirect, but that's something that's very easy to measure. A second thing you might think about is depths of partnerships, which is more subjective. But what other organizations are we in partnership with, and how mutually beneficial are those partnerships? There are the classic things that advocacy groups measure, which is how many emails can we get out on a certain issue to these group of legislators or these group of people on city council or whomever, state relevant state departments. How many emails, how many letters, how many phone calls? It doesn't mean you won, but at least means you've got it's something you can measure that shows that you're putting pressure on people to do what you want them to do. And the other thing, and I'll punt on this in an interesting way, I would have you ask partners and peers, not just in the park, but maybe elsewhere, that do advocacy work, what metrics are they using? And bottom line, you're trying to promote good stuff and stop bad stuff, and there are ways to figure out if that's happening. But that's a little harder to measure, but the outputs you can measure, which is, again, how many emails, how many phone calls, how many activists showed up on lobby day, how many responses did you get from the relevant people, that sort of thing. Jen, you have your hand up.
Just a quick note on the impact indicators. If you're looking for some more resources, we did do a workshop back in November on strengthening impact measurement and evaluation, storytelling. I put a link to those resources in our chat there. So there are some other tools there if you're interested in diving deeper, as well as a recording from that.
Great, thank you. Tracy, I see you.
Yeah, I had a question about how do you think about the impact in relation to the cost? Like, 255 people served against $1,123. Is that worth it? Are we getting enough for?
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about that? Or
that's an awesome question. I mean, there's a few ways to attack that. One way you can do it is if there are peers operating in your region or in other regions and they track a similar metric, I'd be curious to know what the industry standard is, if an industry standard exists. And for many of us, it doesn't. But in some cases, I mean, if you're running, a home healthcare organization, those metrics exist, right? If you're doing childcare, those metrics exist. There's a lot of spaces in which you can find the industry numbers. So I would start there. The second thing is, and this is harder to do, does the amount of money we spend per client, does it actually reflect the quality of the service? And it may be that you're spending more money and not getting as good service or vice versa. Maybe you're spending less on the quality. So I would want some survey data or something from the people who are benefiting. Like, how are we doing? Do you value our work? The part that you pay in, do you get value for that, right? So I'm giving you imperfect answers, but I think the way we do this is we sort of add the imperfect answers together and we come up with something that's slightly more perfect. So yeah, it's an excellent question. I'll take one more and then we're going to move on. Eric, what's your question?
Well, I was just going to join Barbara in expressing some frustration. Our organization's the Adirondack Council, and I suppose ultimately our output is the degree to which we were able to influence legislation. And so I suppose, depending on the political winds, you either go up and down. An alternative way to measure our success is to simply see whether or not our budget is increased, since we rely almost entirely on contributions to come in. So I don't know, is that an invalid standard?
No,
The size of the budget?
I think size of budget is a standard. As you say, size of budget doesn't always translate into political power, right? Because your goal is to move legislation or change state policy or local or regional policy. And so, the advocacy groups that I work with at the beginning of, for example, the legislative session, they say, here are the 6 bills we're working on this year. And then at the end of the session, they'll put out a report that says, here's what happened with each of those 6 bills. And this one passed, this one passed, this one rolled over to the next session, this one was voted down, and these 2 are still in play, and we don't know what's going to happen with them, right? So I think that's legit. And I think if you are doing legislative work, and I know the council does, I think what you want to do is essentially publish your priorities at the beginning of the year. And at the end of the year, you say, here's how we did against these legislative or policy priorities. And that's beautiful. And that's totally subjective in some ways, but in some ways it's objective because these things get voted up or down. And you know if they passed or they didn't. So I think both of those are good metrics. I think growth of budget is a way to show the health of the organization in general. So yeah, I like where you're going. All right, I'm going to proceed here. As I noted, another way we can do this is through graphics. This is borrowed from an organization called Trees Forever. They're in Iowa. They are a tree planting, tree maintenance, tree promotion organization. So they are all about trees. And so here's what we have on this slide. We have membership. This is spread over 5 years. And so membership dipped a little and then it grew, then it bumped. Number of volunteers, they are heavily volunteer based. You will notice the top number on that slide is 10,000 volunteer engagements, right? So in a good year, they are involving like 9,000 people doing tree planting. So that's a really important metric for them is how many volunteers are showing up to help us do this. And then, and this is a little hard to see, but we have, I'm going to look at my other screen here. We have where the money is coming from. And their 3 categories are their endowment fund. They have an endowment that spits off money. They have donor directed, which is basically grants, because a lot of the grants are restricted money. And then they have bequests, money that comes in from people passing away. And so you'll see over 5 years, there's been really steady growth. And it looks like their bequest program is actually paying off because at the end, that number is getting bigger. And, this is a different subject we're not going to touch on today, but the thing about a bequest program is you are never going to know when people are going to pass away. So you invest time in recruiting them and trying to get into their wills, and then sooner or later you yield that money if you stay in touch with them. Here's another take on the revenue. So we have blue project funding, that's grants. The white is community match, and that is either volunteer hours or donate, excuse me, that's volunteer money. And then we have the value of volunteer time, which is the black on top. And I think this is a pretty elegant way to show how your money comes in. The visual is nice. It's easy to understand. Again, there's been some up and down because life is like that. But this is a pretty useful way to present that. Now, the other thing we have here, because this is really the mission slide, is planting. Now, they had a big year in 2008. They got some massive grant and they broke all records, and they've been down since then. And my memory was they predicted this was going to happen and it wasn't a huge problem. But they have plants, they have shrubs, they have seedlings, they have trees, and they're all different colors here. But this is a way of showing, how much new growth are we putting in the ground. And, not everyone has metrics that can be put in graphic form. But let's acknowledge that some of us are visual learners. Some of us learn better through images and pictures as good as words or numbers. And so if we can make this stuff graphically accessible to people, then that serves a wider variety of board members in terms of their learning styles. And I don't know if this is an either or. I think it's probably a both and. I think you need some stuff that's words and numbers, and you need some stuff that's graphic as well. All right, so one more topic and then we'll take a few questions and wrap. One of your jobs, if you're a fiduciary, is to manage risk. And so some basic notes here. You got to diversify your income, got to get money. Again, we're talking about all this stuff that's coming down from DC, which is shaking up a lot of organizations. The solution to that, it's a little late to say this, but the solution to that is income diversification. It's more money from different sources. You need financial controls, you need separation of duties. This is an embarrassing topic to talk about, but there's actually a lot of embezzlement in the nonprofit world because our standards for separating duties, caring for money is not very good. It's not unusual that the same person, goes to the post office, opens the envelopes, gets the money into the bank, is maintaining the checkbook, is balancing the accounts. You need to separate some of that stuff. You need insurance, right? If you have any sort of organizational space, you need liability insurance, company income insurance. A really good product that most of you could benefit from is directors and officers insurance, which gives you an extra layer of protection in case there's some suit against your organization. And I'm not a lawyer, right? I can't give you legal advice. I've said this before. In most cases, if board members are acting in good faith, there's very little legal exposure, but having extra insurance is not a bad thing. And you need backup plans, right? You need data back. You have to make sure your data is backed up. You need to make sure your site is secure. You have, the appropriate locks and alarms and things. You need plans for business continuity in case there is an interruption in your business, a flood, a fire, unexpected loss of leadership. You need to have some sort of contingency plans in place. The last thing I would say is if you're a board member, your job is to focus on strategy. If you're combing through the budget and you find the line item for office supplies and you say something like, why aren't we shopping at Staples? We could save $50 on office supplies. Don't do that. That's not your job. Other people can pay attention to those specific line items. You need to be paying attention to overall, are we healthy? And how do we get healthier? You are required by the federal government in your IRS filings to show whether you have a conflict of interest policy. It's now part of your tax return. And so you need a conflict of interest policy to make sure that board members aren't benefiting directly from the work of the organization. And then people need to be trained, right? Nobody comes out of the womb knowing this stuff. You have to learn it. So we need to invest energy and time in making sure our board members are more financially literate. So we got a couple of minutes. If there are any questions about anything I talked about or perhaps didn't talk about, While you're considering questions, I'll do a quick plug here. I did a book some years ago with my friend Nancy Wasserman. It's called The Board Members Easier Than You Think Guide to Nonprofit Finance. So if you are intrigued by this topic, this is a resource you can seek out if you want more information about how to do this well. Are there
Andy,
questions?
Yep, Andy, John Bernardi, if I could just
John.
make just a comment. That was great stuff. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
One thing that you touched upon a little bit at the end that I think is worth mentioning is that understanding the board financial reports that are provided to you each month or every other month is really important. So I would encourage board members to ask if they don't understand. Set up a time to meet with your the organization CFO or the board treasurer, because maybe you don't understand what a profit and loss statement is, or what a balance sheet is, or all of these different reports that are being put in front of you each month or every other month. So again, it's part of that fiduciary responsibility. And don't be embarrassed if you don't understand, because most people don't know what all these reports are. And I would just encourage people to take the time to really try to grasp all these different reports that are being presented.
Yep. I think, John, you're correct. And I think it falls to the CFO or the treasurer to do regular board training on this. For all the board members, both the ones who are good about it and understand it and those who don't. Christina, you're next.
So I'll try to, my question is there such a thing as a template that can help my operating expenses, income and expenses that's pretty simple. But when we receive grants that I'm going to, for example, the invasive species program that we do in Lake Placid is paid for, it costs money, but is paid for by a nonprofit. So I go ask the Adirondack Foundation to give the shore owners a grant to pay for it, but it never crosses my books.
Right.
And
it's
so,
just a pass through. It goes around you.
And that happens a couple times with the Lake Champlain Basin program, where we receive the grant, but actually we hand the grant over to Adirondack Watershed Institute to implement the program. So the balance sheet or my financials have to be two separate because stuff never crosses my books.
Yeah, I am not an accountant. So this is an accounting question, and it's an excellent question. I am not an accountant. So the short answer is you have to confer with someone who does nonprofit accounting to help you set up a system to account for money that you are not actually passing through. That's not you're not touching at all. And I imagine there's a way to do it. I don't know the answer. Okay, find a professional. Eric, a quick question.
Just a point that the Attorney General's Charities Bureau is a source of a lot of good information on this. This particular book is one that you might get if you contact them. It'll give you a really excellent discussion on your fiduciary responsibilities in terms of the finances as well as your other oversight duties. That's the Attorney General's office.
Thank you very much. It's good. Jen, we're at the top of the hour. Should I give it back to you?
Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I believe we'll hang for a couple minutes if there is a lingering question, but just wanted to thank everybody for their time. Andy's got the upcoming sessions up here. We have recruitment and nominations, the board's role in fundraising. Then John and Brian from United Way are going to do board orientation and training. And then the last session for governance models and nonprofit life cycles. So we look forward to continuing the conversation. We'll reshare the recording link and the resources where we're tracking everything. And do reach out if you have questions. I know you get emails from me, Jennifer Russell at adkfoundation.org. Feel free to reach out. And thanks so much.
Thank
So
you.
I'm going to stop the recording, but we'll hang out for questions for a few minutes.
That was